A tragic epitaph. All of us should seek to be remembered as Christians who loved God with all our hearts and our neighbors as ourselves. Here now is Gene Getz.
The basic illustration for this particular principle really is a tragic story. But as you look at it, it also yields a positive principle. And that's why I've stated this principle positively, even though it's based on this very negative story. Let me share with you what happened. 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 5 and 6. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. Now, Jehoram was the son of Jehoshaphat. You see, again, another father-son story. Reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Now, when it says he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, it's talking about the northern kingdoms. It's talking about Jeroboam. And more specifically, makes reference to one of the most wicked kings in Israel, and his name was Ahab. And so it makes reference to that right here in this verse. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done, for Ahab's daughter was his wife. And by the way, her mother, Ahab's daughter, her mother was Jezebel. This was Ahab and Jezebel. And Jezebel, of course, was not a mother who exemplified what it means to be godly. Just the opposite. So here we have this king, the son of Jehoshaphat, who marries Ahab's daughter. And notice it says he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. It's a terrible story. He actually killed, and I'm reading here, with the sword all his brothers as well as some of the princes of Israel. He slaughtered all of his brothers because of jealousy, because of power, because of control. And he also committed horrible idolatry. We read in verse 11, Jehoram also built high places in the hills of Judah, those high places where they would set up the altars to the false gods, particularly to Baal, because Ahab was a Baal worshiper. And of course, Jezebel also was a Baal worshiper, but not only that, she worshipped the Asherahs, which was another incredible, immoral kind of worship in terms of the gods, the false gods. So Jehoram also built high places in the hills of Judah, and he caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves. These are the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This is Judah. This is the southern kingdom. These are the people that lived right there where the temple was built. And he led them into this horrible spiritual adultery. And we know that worshiping false gods, idolatry in the Old Testament was considered spiritual adultery. In other words, turning from worshiping the one true God to worshiping false gods. Spiritual adultery, prostituting themselves, sexual promiscuity. Well, it was in this context, and somewhat ironically, I think, that Elijah wrote a letter to Jehoram. Now, remember who Elijah was. Elijah was the man who confronted Ahab and confronted the prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel. And so he confronted this king. And he told him that because of his persistent evil deeds, God was going to afflict his people. He was going to cause Jehoram to suffer a terrible death. Elijah said, "You're going to die, and it's going to be horrible." The fact of the matter is, his body virtually exploded at the time of his death. It's not a pretty picture. But God warned him through Elijah, just like Elijah warned Ahab and Jezebel. But Jehoram married the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and it's a serious result. In chapter 21, verse 20, Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, He reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. Now here is a tragic epitaph. He died to no one's regret. Boy, how would you like to have that on your tombstone? He died to no one's regret and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. And you notice that little tombstone, paraphrased, Jehoram, no one was sorry he died. How would you like to have that epitaph? How sad, how tragic it was. Now, in the New Testament, I try to find a corollary with these principles to support the principle. And again, let me just read that principle so you get the continuity. All of us should seek to be remembered as Christians who love God with all our hearts and our neighbors as ourselves. Take this illustration. Let's go to Joppa. This is the New Testament. Acts 9, verse 36. We read, in Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. By the way, the word Tabitha means gazelle. It's a beautiful image, a beautiful gazelle, a most beautiful animal. But here was this disciple, follower of Jesus, named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. But notice what we read about Dorcas. She was always doing good works and acts of charity. Now that's setting the stage for an epitaph. Acts 9:39. Peter got up and went with them because she died. And what happened when she died? Well, Peter got up and he went with them, that is the widows who came and said, please come and do something for this wonderful woman. And by the way, Peter was right there in that particular area, and he went to Joppa. And when he arrived, they led him to the room upstairs, and all the widows approached him, weeping and showing him the robes and the clothes that Dorcas had made while she was with them. I think basically we could imagine this beautiful epitaph. A godly woman. She was a godly woman. What a statement that would be on a tombstone. By the way, the Lord raised her from the dead. Peter raised her from the dead. And so God gave her more life. But this was a beautiful, beautiful story of an epitaph in terms of she was a very godly woman. And so we have a reflection and response question. What epitaph would you like to have engraved on your own tombstone? Yeah, that's kind of an awkward question, really. If I said to you, what epitaph would you like on your tombstone? I did that to a person, caught her off guard one day, a woman that I really admire, and I said, what would you like on your tombstone? And she thought about it just a second, and she said, I'd like to have it read, she loved Jesus more than anything. I thought that was kind of neat. On second thought, maybe she would have been a little more, should I say, subtle? I thought about that. You know what I'd like on my tombstone? Saved by grace. Saved by grace. Or maybe a simple servant of Jesus. But one thing is, I certainly wouldn't want the epitaph that nobody cared. This guy died, nobody cared. Because that's what went on the tombstone of this evil king. Barnabas. Beautiful story of Barnabas, that generous guy who sold a field. And the apostles changed his name to Barnabas from Joseph, meaning son of encouragement. I can see his tombstone. A generous man. That's a beautiful epitaph. Probably our goal should be to allow others to write our epitaph. And hopefully what they write will reflect our love for Jesus. Let me read that principle once again. All of us should seek to be remembered as Christians who love God with all our hearts and our neighbors as ourselves. There, of course, is the great commandment.